ਕਲਾਸ ਹੈ ਮੈਂ ਸਰਬੱਤ ਦਾ ਭਲਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ
ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ ਹਾਂਜੀ welcome all of you to Coach Gurbani. I hope that all of you online had a good summer. We're meeting after a bit of a break, and some of it was by design. I think we needed a little time to just sort of collect our thoughts as to how things have been going. We got some fairly positive feedback from the group, and one of the things that we decided to do, at least experiment with, was to actually start thinking in terms of themes, sort of take more of a thematic approach. We've actually spent quite a bit of time on Japji Sahib. So the thought was that as we were doing Japji Sahib, we realized that there were some concepts that surfaced over and again, and they demanded a much more thorough treatment than we could actually allow at the time, because we wanted to actually just stay within the context of the Japji, and then within the context of the Pauri, and within the context of the line. We didn't want to digress too much. However, we have quite a few topics that were put on that were tabled for then, and we figured we would try this experiment and see if we could invite not more than 4 people, perhaps, and bring up a topic like we are today, which is going to be Haumai, and maybe allow the participants a little more time, as well as maybe pick the subject up from a holistic perspective. So that's what we are going to try today. And we are going to start at the very beginning, which is Haumai. To me, one of the central concerns of, if not the central concern of Gurmat, what Haumai is, where it springs from, what does it do to us, and why does Bani actually call it not a very good thing. And yet, Bani also tells us that Haumai is something that is instilled in us by the Creator. So that's a bit of a paradox. We would also like to sort of explore themes around, why is it its own medicine, Daru Bhi Ismai. So you get the drift of where I'm going. So with that said, we have Rana Veerji, we have Gurjeet Singh Veerji from Australia, and we have Ikonkar Kaurji, and we have Harpreet Singh Ji from Boston. Am I missing anybody? I know we have Harvinder Singh as well.
I think that's all we have.
Acha ji, theek hai. So I'm going to take a leap on this and reach out to Harpreet. Harpreet, would you mind sort of setting the context of what a discussion around Haumai should look like? I had offered some questions which were put on the blog, and I think I repeated some of them. But would you mind kind of laying the context on how do we approach Haumai, especially given the fact that it appears very early in Japji, Satyar and Haumai go hand in hand, give Satyara Hoye. That question is being answered by, Hukum Rajai Chalana and so on, and the relationship between these concepts. Would you mind sort of just setting the ball rolling for us? He's mute.
Hanji, Harpreet, you're mute, right?
I'm sorry.
Okay, he's good now.
Okay, so
Harpreet, could you hear me?
Yes, I could. So I think you've already touched upon a number of questions that come to my mind from time to time, and as you mentioned, this is a paradox that the Guru Sahib is looking at Haumai in a negative sense most of the time, but then at times there are verses that say that it is essential for our being, for us to to actually carry on the important works that need to be done, and so I almost think there is a relationship between free will and Haumai, that as Sikhs, we are to exercise our free will, and that probably requires reliance on Haumai. But at the same time, if we are going to be guru-centered and lead guru-centered lives, then we almost have to understand our own existence as part of something much larger, almost as if we are a drop in this very large ocean. And so, in that larger context, uh, our own existence really doesn't matter. And I often look at it from the perspective of what's the difference between South Asian thought more generally, and if you look at the Enlightenment thought. And what the Enlightenment did was put the human being at in the center of the universe. So after the Enlightenment in Europe, you've got the pursuit of human happiness is the most important concern. And so then individuality becomes really important. And then pursue, so, but if you look at South Asian thought, and in particular Sikh thought, there, uh, unless we erase ourselves or diminish our own individuality, um, then we cannot think of the greater good, and that almost this spontaneity that we have, or this inclination towards self-sacrifice when it's necessary. It's almost spontaneous. These decisions are made, not intellectualized or rationalized. When something happens, we just Sikhs have shown this repeatedly in their history, that we are able to um, sacrifice the individual self for the greater good. So I guess that this tension exists, but at the same time, you know, how do we figure out when is Haumai a positive force, when is it a negative force, and how do we reconcile this tension? So those would be good topics to begin with, I guess.
Okay, thank you. You raised some good points, which hopefully we'll come back to. I'm going to go out to Ekunkar Kaurji now, and sort of ask her if she would. So one of the challenges we have, Ekunkarji, is the fact that there is no appropriate term, as far as I know, for Haumai in the English language. As a matter of fact, Haumai, it seems to me, is a unique word even within the Indian context. And it's a term that's been coined by Guru Nanak, and it's obviously derived from two related Sanskrit terms. But there isn't a term like Haumai even in the Indian context. So that to me is interesting. And the fact that Harpreet raised that it has a dual nature. Would you want to shed some light on that?
Well, I'll share some thoughts on it. It's up to you all if there's any light in them or not. But I was grateful to be back with all of you. I've missed you this summer. And I've been thinking about Haumai since I realized that it was the theme, and so I'm just going to spin some thoughts about it. For me, when I look at Guru Nanak's philosophy, he really posits an interdependent and endless infinite creation. And that what we're here to do as human beings is to realize that and realize our essential interconnectedness with it. And Hukam comes from the interconnectedness with that vast, infinite, creative, ever-changing creation. And Haumai is like, it's the I, me, right? I, me, I. And Haumai is the construct that the mind creates to form the boundary. it's the boundary of our perception. It's the territory. It's in that big, vast cosmic play where I feel contained, where I feel safe, where I feel my territory. And I agree that it's not the same as ego necessarily, because in Gurbani, identity has lots of different perspectives, and in the West, ego is really the only concept of identity. But in Gurbani, Nam is identity, and Mun, mind, is identity, and there's lots of ways to talk about identity. So Haumai isn't necessarily about identity to my mind. It's about where the sensitivity of the human being stops and says, this is as much as I can see, this is as much as I'm willing to be interconnected with, this is as much as I'm willing to perceive. So the Haumai has a limit when creation is limitless, and the Haumai has an end to the interdependency when the creation is endlessly interdependent.
So, if I may, would you then say that it's not about identity, but is it about individuation then? The sense of containment, that this is my boundary, that is the concept of individuation, because in the Siddha Bani, right, that is Guru Nanak's response, right, that the world comes into being through Haumai, and that is also the process of creation, the individuation from the one.
Yes, that it's individuation, it's the limit of our perception.
Right. It's like the isolating bubble of consciousness that separates us. It's like a bubble on water, perhaps.
Yes, it's the bubble in which we can exist, and it's necessary, and yet we're called to then, our practice, break through it to a much more limitless vision. So those are my thoughts.
Well, thank you. Paramjit Singh ji,
to listen to other people so that I can participate next time. But then, as a preparation for this dialogue, I went through searching for the word Haumai in Guru Granth Sahib, and I found 621 panktis where the word has appeared. And I went through all of those, and maybe I have missed, as Harpreet was saying, that I found that the word Haumai has negative connotation everywhere. Is there any positive connotation? Maybe I might have missed it. But my understanding is what I learned from those 621 lines. The last few pages I couldn't search because the search engine was not working properly. So whatever I saw as a negative connotation. But then I wanted to find out what Haumai is. Guru Sahib is saying about Haumai. There are a few panktis which I will prepare next time and be more concise or more organized to say what I understand. But then I had to go outside of Guru Granth Sahib as well to understand. As you pointed out, there's no English comparable word for that. Ego is a word there. Ego is a self-concept. Ego, as my understanding by doing some other research on this thing, ego is a very neutral thing. It's a self-concept. And that self-concept comes when we start to develop it at the age of 2 or so, when the child is able to recognize himself in a mirror at the age of 2 or 3, and that is the self-concept, the ego starts to develop. Over time, we get all the stimuli. And with that, the sensory organs are receiving all those things, and our Haumai changes, our ego changes. And then there's a fine line between ego, arrogance, and self-confidence. And my understanding, I have to come back to that next week once I have my thoughts together. But what I understood so far is ego is a neutral term, but when that neutral term comes the false or the pretense that we know this thing and that thing, that becomes arrogance. Haumai is a word something between ego and arrogance, but if whatever we claim to know, we have really experienced, we have experienced, then that becomes self-confidence. When we pretend we know, when we don't have any experience, that's an arrogance. And the word Haumai, my understanding so far has been between ego and arrogance, but there's no comparable word comparable to Haumai in English, as you pointed out. And these are some of the thoughts, but then I'm going through all of that. What I discover is Guru Sahib is saying how Haumai can be eliminated, how it can be subdued, how it can disappear, and those things are said. For example, I just put on the blog recently about Haumai Dheer Guroga, Daru bhi is my. So when I was reading it, Guru Sahib is referring. Remember that most of the Gurbani is referring, the reference is to our mind. Home, Dheera Grog have what? A what? Home is the Dheera Grog of mind. And the mind itself has the antidote for that. That's how I interpreted it. Home Dheera Grog hai, Daru bhi is my. ਅੱਗੇ ਲਈ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ but if you shabat, you bring this in the same mind who's afflicted by this Haumai disease ailment, if you bring Shabad the Naam into that one, that Haumai will disappear. That is my understanding. These are some of the thoughts, but I will be more happy to put together my thoughts as you suggested in the email that we should come prepared. I will be more prepared next time.
Yeah, we'll all be more prepared next time, Ji. We'll all be more prepared. Thank you for your observations. Veer Gurjeet Singh Ji, let's get your take on this.
हाँ जी, वाहिगुरु जी का खालसा, वाहिगुरु जी की फतेह. I've also written just a bit on the blog, whatever time I got today. So Haumai is actually a composite word. You read Gurbani, there are Haumai about, as Veerji has said, 629 times. And they also write Haumai with a tippi, which actually is not the right way, but still. And there's few times they've written it with the Lankar. But then you have got the word Haum coming 700 times and the word Mai coming 700 times too. So looks like it is a composite word, and it's one of the main topics as we are discussing in the second party of Japji. Nanak hukum hai je bujhe, ta hum mein kahe na koi. And they also say hukum hum mein naame naal virodh hai. It means Haumai is something, if we have to explain, it is two entities which has Haumai. Haum aya durun chal ke. This is one, if we have to understand it deeply. There is some Haum who has come. So it is good that someone has touched it, that Haumai is thinking that I could do something. I could exist on my own. I don't need the Sachkhand to exist with me. But that's the whole story of Haumai. So two entities, Haum aya durun chal ke, main takki to sharnaegi. So there's another main there. When Haum comes into pregnancy, it's only Haum. But once it is born, there's another entity associated with it, which is Mai. Until Mai comes back to the Haum, the whole riddle cannot be solved. The Mai is in the Man, and Haum is in the Mool, from where the Man is born. Man is born out of its Mool. The conscious, which is correct conscious, that's, I shared an article last, I think, month. Someone has written in the Western world, he has written Adam and Eve, the story of human consciousness. So the story runs between three characters. There's an Adam, which is positive consciousness. There's an Eve, which someone has, I think, Ravindra Birji, you have put it on the blog. Tan Pirka ki Sangi Vasa, which Haumai Peet Karari. That there is, Haum is coming from the Pir and the Mai is coming from the Tan. Whether you say it's coming from Man, so this is the way you could best explain it. So the best explanation is given by Guru Angad himself actually. There is a Pauri number 7 in Asa Ki Waar. Firstly, Guru Nanak starts the context. Haum which aya, Haum which gaya. An entity comes into this world with Haum. So Haum is Another way I could explain is Jo Brahm Ande Soi Pinde. The Brahm gets in illusion and is binding himself into a drop, as someone has said nicely. I will say in the eggshell. Until he breaks this egg, he is not back into the Sachkhand. This is what Bhagat Kabir ji says as Futo and until we really attain the well and we think that we can exist on our own. So this is what I've understood as a perspective of Haumai. It's associated between the two entities. It should never be a positive thing. To exist as a Haum is never a positive thing. We have to, because the big shlok, Haum vich aaya, Haum vich gaya, Haum vich jammya, Haum vich muva. But the word man is not associated yet. It means he comes in a home, but when he comes into the world after taking the body, then the man also associates with him. If he can get rid of his home through man, but the man is another thing which actually should go out of the seven senses and should bring knowledge back to him. But the consciousness goes out, which is the man, and ultimately never brings anything positive, gets stuck in the Maya. But for Bhagats, that Maya has positively brought the knowledge back into, and then Ram Nam Jap Hirde Maya, the discussion has to take within you, and then the Haumai can be eliminated. So, Vahguru Ji ka Khalsa, Vahguru Ji ki Fateh.
Thank you, Viji. I will confess that I am perhaps a little more confused than I was in the beginning. I'm not sure which direction to take this discussion in, because we all said our piece. But I think the questions that we tried to pose to ourselves remain just as prominently displayed as before. So I think what I have picked up from this dialogue so far, one, there is a thought there that says this is a bit of a paradox, but most of us are kind of relating to Haumai in a negative sense. My question is that Guruji Dastarene Sanu, what he's saying is that even though this is a malady, it has been actually given to us. The melody of Haumai has been given to us. The third Guru has told us that, right? So, so what I wonder is, why did we get this malady? What is the point? I mean, are we trying to, is there something to be done? Because it is a malady and it is a chronic disease. How do we resolve it? That is the kind of sense I am trying to get around Haumai. We talk about whether or not it is ego. I want to demolish that pretty quickly, because I think that Haumai has been equated to the I experience. It has been equated to ego. It has been equated to ahankar in the old Indian system of thinking, the Sankhya school. It has been related to sin. I mean, MacLeod actually translate Haumai as sin. It is, and McAuliffe has translated Haumai as pride. I'm not so sure that any one of these translations or representations is quite accurate. At least for me, I don't think they are. There's something that is left unsaid. What I do find interesting, and I want you guys to comment on this, is that in Bani Sagar, and I can't remember the exact book, it suggests that Haumai is a delusional structure. It is not real. That it is an imaginary center. It is an imaginary center that allows us to coordinate our mental and behavioral engagements in the world. So it doesn't really have any fixed point. And I find that very interesting. So what I'm going to throw out there is that there is a suggestion here that there might be a dual existence that we are living. One purely biological, obviously, but one that is somewhat symbolic, that is based on language, speech, the mental structures that we create, and hence this imaginary center, because it's all symbolic. Ekunkarji, do you want to comment on that?
Sure, I will. I'm happy to. You know, there was a line from Guru Amar Das where he says that Haumai and Nam can't exist in the same place. And if we're going to get back to this notion of identity and perception.
Well, maybe we want to ask the question. You earlier said this is really not identity; it is more the process of individuation, right? So there is a difference there. Do we want to establish that it's really not identity? If it isn't, that what it is? Because what is it? Because there is a suggestion that, as I just said, it may be an imaginary center that allows us to think that we exist separately.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think I'm going to keep getting back to my notion of the limit of the perception, because like if we think about the human being as existing in relationship with lots of things, and what's my boundary of my perception, and the Nam is the aspect of ourselves that is infinite, the divine identity that is beyond time and space, that takes form and leaves and doesn't have any problem with any of it. And that this idea that we're either in that limited view or in the unlimited view. And we get to the unlimited view through sadhana, through meditation, because we develop our sensitivity so much, it reaches beyond what the Haumai kind of establishes for itself. And it's like the line about Haumai being a disease, but also the cure is in it, is that it's kind of like, you know, the egg, you know, the chick has to be born, the chick forms inside of the egg, right? So there's a perception of a boundary and a limitedness in which we must enter creation. And by sadhana, we start to be the little chick that breaks through that egg. And then that Haumai can fall apart, and then that infinite identity that knows, oh, I'm not going to die. I'm one with the universe. I'm one with this crazy interdependent creative thing that's going on. That becomes the true identity, the Satnam. And those two perspectives don't ever exist together. You're either in one or the other. So maybe that addresses what you brought up.
Thank you. Preet Singh, do you want to reflect on this a little bit? I'm thinking, I tend to believe that because, Pucho, okay, so Haumai, where does it exist? It doesn't have a physical existence. So could it really be an imaginary center that we have? I mean, a delusional structure? I mean, it is there, but it might be delusional. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
So no, it's a very interesting way to put it. That this is a construct, and whether this construct is real, I think that's the question you're trying to raise here. Mm-hmm. And like most constructs, they're not often tangible. That they do exist in our minds, and the way I look at it is that unless so there's a before stage and then there's an after stage, and our animal state, where we to our lower self, and when we exist in that sort of a state, then we are subject to Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, Ahankar, the five maladies that Guru Sahib speaks about repeatedly. And there's also the sense here that the five of these sort of stem from Haumai. So in that sense, it is not so much of a construct that is, I mean, it's not a insignificant construct, even if it is a construct. It's something that results in many other problems that we have. And once we expand our field of consciousness, once we, what Ekam Karkorji is saying, once there is that increased sensitivity to our origin, mantu jot sarup hai, apna mol pachan. Once we have recognized our true origin, then we know that we are part of something much bigger. And
so Harpreet, just to stop you there, so even when, and Ekam Karji just also commented on that, and I have a follow-up question to both of you. So she said that once you recognize this, you don't exist in one or the other, and I think that's what you're trying to allude to. But let's say that you recognize that you're really part of something bigger, that you're just a small cog in this big wheel or big network, if you will. But you never really lose a sense of your separateness, or do you? Because you wouldn't be able to function.
Right, and that's really what I wanted to kind of get to, is that despite your not knowing this, you won't be able to operate in the world of phenomena unless there is this way to come back to this state. So I think that's what Guru Sahib is saying, that that this is the Dhira Grog, but there is this is also necessary to function. So I guess one would need to come back to return to the state, maybe modified in a modified fashion, that and so that you could function in the world of phenomena.
So would you say then that I find that interesting, that coming back modified is what I want to pick on. So it seems to me that recognition or the realization that you're really part of a very large interconnected underlying unity, and that when you come back modified, perhaps you're inspired then to operate differently. Would you say that would be true? Because that you are then engaging in the world in a sort of a different mode altogether.
Yeah, then instead of running after things that don't that Barney would say is Maya, and things that are considered attachments, one would engage in altruistic things that actually make the world better,
right,
and bring about the Halimi Raj that Guru Arjan speaks of. So
correct.
So yeah, I guess, but you would still, in order to have a sense of the world and your place in it,
right,
one would still need to recognize that you exist.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Thanks. We'll come back. Anji, Ranaveji, do you want to add to that?
Yes, few observations. One, you mentioned few times to Harpreet while he was talking, and you responded with clarification, and you referred to him few times. You are modified. We are not. That is a very basic question. Who is this you are referring to? That's a mind. That's a whole Gurbani we are trying to understand. We don't know who I and who you is. We refer to that. You come back or whatever it is. So that's one issue which I'm trying to get handle on, because unless we understand who we are addressing, we cannot bring about any change. The second thing about Haumai, as you were pointing out, I feel Haumai is a state of mind. If the mind is very elusive, so is Haumai. If our mind is pure, there's no Haumai. That state of mind is very clean, nirmal. Gurbani, very word I have many times. Nirmal is very pure. There's no Haumai. So I find Haumai is a state of mind. And other thing, what as I think more about.
So before you go on, can I just interrupt you?
Please.
So you were saying that if if the mind is nirmal, then there is no Haumai. But we were just considering the fact that you cannot be with no Haumai, because otherwise you wouldn't exist, or at least would not have any sense of your own existence. So how do you reconcile the two?
Okay, the word Haumai, before I get to the word, first, what I said earlier was ego is a very neutral word, it's a self-concept. If we are living the material world, there's no spiritual world outside, then this is a with self-concept, and we are doing all the things with self-concept. Guru Sahib say, how which narak surag avatar, how which hase, how which roy, all these things we are doing in I-ness. As soon as we add to material world, spiritual world, now home is defined as our self-concept relative to spiritual world. That's what Guru Sahib says when you forget about Akal Purakh, and then Haumai becomes a negative connotation, which I said negative connotation. Otherwise, it's a self-concept, it's a neutral concept. But as soon as Guru Sahib brings that, don't forget Akal Purakh. Don't think the material world is everything. Because you live in the material world, how which has say, how which roe, how which pariye, how which thove, how which jati agency se, sove, khove, jo bhi hai. All those things are happening there. I'm not worried about that. But once you bring in the spiritual world, you bring in that relative to that, it becomes a negative thing. That's my understanding.
Anji, thank you, Ji. Anji, Veji, Gurjeet Singh Ji, would you like to add anything?
हाँ जी, वाहिगुरु जी का खालसा वाहिगुरु जी की फतेह. Ranaveer ji has, even before, he has always asked, this is actually a question which every Gurmukh should ask. We can't define you and me. It's not in any other religion, that's the problem. The person who is advising us about Haumai is Puran Brahm. Puran Brahm has no Haumai. But the one who is being advised has Haumai and he doesn't know. So that's where the whole of Gurbani is written. I will try to give one or two panktis, like see if Rana Virji can get some help. So I think Guru Nanak said, "Main kita na jata haram khor." It says "main." It starts with the "main." Ho kya mukh desa dusht chor. Because the man is only created at birth time and the man dies before you go back to give your lekha. So it's a ho comes and ho goes. Very beautifully explained. Main kita na jata. The mind doesn't even know. There are two minds. The negative mind doesn't even know that what I'm doing, because he's really in illusion. He's sleeping, but he's being advised by a person who is awakened. Puran Brahma is telling him. Then he says, "Ho kya muh." Now it is ho. Ho kya muh desa dusht. Because ho is to go and enter it into the Sachkhand. The lekha is with the ho. The lekha is not with the man. The man only came for a temporary being here and vanished before he left the world. And if the ho, antanaveda tere jeepe lije, ho has to give the answer because the ho came. The man actually got associated for some positiveness to dilute the ho, but the man has gone the other way and has actually concentrated the ho. What ho he bring here, he's not washed it, he has actually Main, Suddh bin avarna koi. Who is saying to whom? Main is the negative mind, my man, saying to his Jot Sarup. Man tu Jot Sarup hai apna mool pehchan. The apna mool is mera Satgur. If the mind, if we can differentiate like this, there is no other religion who talks about this. And ultimately, we talk from their angle, as Charan Virji normally say, all our tikakari and our thought is post-colonial. The Christians have forced us to think their way, but we have to think our way and tell them which way is better. So this is mere Satgura, it's my own conscious, mera mool, main tudh bin. Who is this man? No tika defines man. And I think Virji has really raised a good question. I'll put another one. Main bin gur dekhe neend na aave. This is the man. The Ma says it's only for a positive case when it says that. But otherwise, he doesn't want to see the Gur at all. It's only for a Brahmajnani that he says, Main bin Gur dekhe. Dekhna kinu hai? Who he has to visualize? He has to visualize his mool. Then only you can visualize Vaheguru. But we are one step short because of this, all this Hinduism thoughts and other thoughts. We have to, Main has to go with the mool first. Main bin Gur dekhe. Main bin Gur dekhe. The day I have seen my Gur, I am Puran Brahm. Then I go into the next stage of Par Brahm. So this, I think, is the main illusion. But I will tell you, just if you read this slok very carefully, Haumai eha jaat hai, Haumai karam kamai. If you think you can do a karam, you are in Haumai. That's the first indication given by Mahalla Duja. Then he says, Haumai ehi bandhana fir joni paai. It's not an illusion. Awakened, enlightened Brahm, Puran Brahm tells you that you will never be able to stop this reincarnation because you have Haumai. You are sleeping, you don't know. Then he says, Haumai kithon upajai. There is no better explanation. Kit sanjame jai. If it has grown from somewhere, where is the root? Let's go and cut the root away. Then he says, Haumai eho hukam hai. It's your problem. You are doing hukams. No one listens to your hukam. Everywhere the hukam hai andar sabko, the hukam comes from Parmeshwar. You be better to align with the hukam. You can't do anything yourself. Then he says, Haumai dirgh rog hai. It is not from here. It's coming from long time with you. Daru bhi ismai. Haun hai kinu. It means Haun is to the chit, to the mool. If he leaves his Haun, man leaves his Main, the riddle is solved. Kirpa kare ji apni. Now here we are so clever in writing stuff. If the Lord grants me his grace, which Lord? Yes, my own Lord. Manne ki gati kahi na jaye. If I accept the fact that this Gurbani is true word coming from Par Brahm to the Puran Brahm, Kirpa kare je apni. We have to do the grace on ourselves. It's not that God has to do grace on us. He has done enough grace to give us this Gurbani. Ta Gur ka shabad kamai. Accept it. Read it. You have to accept it. Then what Nanak says, he gives a guarantee. Nanak kahe suno jano, it sanjami dukh jai. That's the only way you can eradicate your Haumai. The first thing is the
so Virji, let me stop you here. You mentioned a few things. One is that if you think you're doing a karam, you're in Haumai. And then we talked about the fact that some sense of your self-existence is necessary to function in the phenomenal world. So how does one reconcile these two views? And secondly, you talked about eradicating Haumai. I keep bringing that subject up. What is it that we are eradicating?
We are eradicating the lack of wisdom.
Well, but that's
Haumai is nothing, but is basically the lack of wisdom in us. We are not Puran Brahm. We are broken.
So it begs the question: what is wisdom? I'm sorry, but it sort of goes.
Yeah, but what is God for us?
Yeah,
God,
but you
Guru,
see, then we'll just go around in circles because I'll say what is wisdom.
Where there is wisdom, there is no illusion. A total state of enlightenment where there is no bharam. But we only say it bharam. That bharam is the cause of all the five evils.
But what is this illusion? What is the illusion?
Illusion is that I could do something myself.
So are you suggesting that we are doing nothing ourselves?
No, you are doing nothing yourself. This is the only thing.
Just hold your thought there. Hold your thought there. That's a very interesting thought. I want to open this up to the others. So Harpreet, you talked about free will, but here we are hearing that there's nothing that we are doing ourselves. So it kind of, I think, makes for an interesting discussion. Do you want to say something to that?
So yeah, I mean this is if we're not doing anything ourselves, then this whole notion of free will then basically comes in, becomes suspect, right? So, I mean, I think when we look at the choices, we're making choices all the time. So whether I choose to do something good or bad, this is a choice that the guru is letting me make, and so that's free will. And obviously, the notion of grace exists in Sikhi, and when there is grace, then I'm more likely to do better things. So I would love to hear Veerji's thoughts on how how,
Yeah,
how does
we'll get back to we'll get back to him.
Mhm.
But I just want to give the others an opportunity. So,
Yeah.
Ekunkar Kaurji, on this subject of free will versus we are not doing anything ourselves, it seems to me that if we are not doing anything ourselves, then there is no point in doing anything, and I suppose you can't be held accountable for anything then. Then I guess anything goes. What do you think?
I think this is one of the great paradoxes of Guru Nanak and Gurbani, because the both ideas are there in my understanding. And there's a great couplet in Japji, Ape bi jape hi kao, nana kukumi avahal jao. It's like what you reap, what you sow, but everything happens in hukam. And it's kind of like, how do you get your mind around the fact that both of these things are simultaneously existing? You have to take responsibility for your actions, and yet your actions are taking place in the context of a much bigger hukam that you're actually not in control of. So, the journey is that we have to give up free will, that the Haumai is I'm doing it, and that the expanded sensitivity is that actually that's the illusion. The illusion is that I'm the doer, but I can give up that illusion when I see you as the doer. Like Sukhmani is all about that there's just one doer doing everything. But
but you're still making choices, though, conscious choices. As Harpreet said, I mean, the world is presenting itself to me across a spectrum of choices, and I'm mentally, consciously making a choice. Is the suggestion here that that's an illusion?
How you apply your mind is the only free will that you have, but the outcome of how you apply your mind is never in your control. And that's
okay. So, that's a different concept, though. I mean,
apply your mind to meditate, then the one will work for you, or apply your mind to do what you want and live in action and reaction. So you only have free choice in a very small context because the outcome of what you do with your mind is never in your power. That's where the hukam comes in.
Okay, thank you. So no, I understand the fact that outcomes are never really fully controlled by us, but that's different from saying that we are not making the choices. I could be making a whole lot of choices, and not all the outcomes might coincide with what I desire. That I get. Ranavirji, I want to give you an opportunity.
Yes, I would say you don't have free will, but I'm going to put an asterisk on the top of that. And I'm going to explain what do I mean by that. Let me give you a simple example. And then I'll come back to what you said, you don't have free will. And I said, yes, you don't have it. My asterisk, I try to explain it. Let's say one country, don't mind if I use a name of USA. America is supplying a lot of funding to a lot of countries. There are a lot of destructions taking place. People are doing the destruction over there. Let's assume that. US is not doing. Local people are doing it. But the source is here. So you are doing free will, but you don't have any free will if the source is taken away from that. You are nobody. In that sense, I don't have a free will because there's something inside us which is controlled by Almighty. Jyot jindi gal kar lete hain. If the source is not there, our free will is not there. So when I put an asterisk there, what I'm saying is, yes, you seem to be saying, this is your Haumai, that I'm doing it. But if something happens to you tomorrow, you're nothing. So in that sense, what I'm saying is, there's no free will. It is as trust, free will, that we think we are doing it, and that's again Haumai comes in, and that's Guru Sahib saying in that on Haumai ya jaat hai, Haumai karma kamai. We think we are doing it.
अच्छा, मैं लगता है रविंदर ने समाधि ला ली. Okay. We have about 5 minutes left, and I want to give each one of you an opportunity. I mean, this is a discussion that perhaps we could have, we could continue one more round. I think we barely scratched the surface here, because I want to talk about the fact that this rather extensive passage from Asa Ki War that says how much aaya, how much gaya, how much jamya, and so on and so forth. That seems to tell me that the whole game of life is actually structured on the basis of Haumai. Because this is what is created, that Haumai is necessary to creation. Haumai kar kar jant upaya. But we can't obviously get into that discussion. I would like to sort of continue with a few more thoughts along this, if it's okay with all of you. So, with that said, Harpreet, you have any concluding thoughts and comments?
Well, I would say that I am not finding these arguments persuasive about the fact that we don't have free will.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we are consistently making choices, and many choices are neutral, right? I mean, I got to go buy some food or groceries, whether I go to supermarket number 1 or number 2 that are equidistant from my home. It's a choice I'm making. The Guru doesn't care where I go shop, and so it's similarly, throughout life we are presented with dilemmas. We're presented with very difficult choices often, and those are the choices that we make, and that's where the whole notion of this karma, or the karma, where the actions are accounted for, comes in. Otherwise, the whole notion of karma would break down in theology. I mean, it would be meaningless if we weren't accounted for, or our actions were not accounted for.
Right.
So that would be my short response.
Hanji. Gurjeet Singh Veer, concluding comments?
Yeah, I mean, where is the Karam philosophy comes in Gurbani? I don't understand. Karam philosophy is a Hindu philosophy. Our is a Param philosophy. We are born because we had Param in us. Who did the first Karam then? There is such a big Shabad by Bhagat Kabir ji. He says if Karam is the aim of Srishti, how did we did the first Karam when we didn't even have the body? So I will just read one shalok from Bhagat Kabir ji. So what he says Kabir, jo main chitvu na kare kya mere chitve hoye. This is a Shabad said by an enlightened person. Kabir, jo main chitvu na kare, he says, I make millions of choices. Even sometimes 99% of them don't happen. Maybe 1% which was to happen, our choice was with the hukum. And he says, apna chitve hari kare, jo mere chit na ho. So this happens every day. We just give you a little proverb that all those people who work under us, I'm a farmer, they abuse us because we don't pay them. But with their abuse, our bulls don't die. If their will is the right will, free will, then all the farmers, bulls, and their families should die, because they literally say these things that, well, you should suffer a loss. So these things don't happen. Whatever is the hukum, we have one free will. That has been mentioned in Gurbani. One aas, ek aas rakho man mein. I can control my mind with the Gurbani. That's the only thing I can do. But even most of us failing there too. Very few have achieved it. Everything else, I can control my order. Not to say it, but otherwise, everything is happening is a universal will. And I think has been explained very nicely by Rana Paji and others. So I'm thankful to them.
Haji, thank you, Ji. I think the important thing that here, based on what Gurjeet Singh Veer ji has said, is the distinction between Param and Karam. And I think I raised this earlier. So what is that illusion? What is that param? And it seems to me that that is what we need to figure out. I would just suggest that the param basically is that I exist as a separate I. The notion of finding a right answer, I don't think there is a right answer. There are answers, and we pick up on them. So before let me give Ekunkar Kaurji a final concluding comment.
Well, thank you, G. And there's one line, and I wish I could remember where it was from, but in Gurbani, and where the Guru says, God himself leads the man astray, and by leading him astray, he instructs him. And to me, that gets back to this kind of core idea that as Sikhs, what we're here to do is learn. And so we do have, I agree, we have free will in the sense of how we train our minds, but the universe is always working with us to learn our lessons in ways that we can't even sense or know until we become more meditative and more intuitive. So I think it's a really important conversation about how free will works in Gurbani, and I think it's something worth, to think about more.
Thank you. Ranavirji, one final comment, and then we'll come back on what we want to do.
The first thing is that we have to continue, of course. So there's a lot of things, very interesting topic. Other thing is it's a lot more complex. It's not a simple concept. And Karam, Param, what we are talking about, that all fit very nicely into the Gurbani. That's my understanding. As Harpreet Singh was saying that there has Karam, Param, something like that. But again, when Harpreet Singh, you are saying that there's a free will, because I cannot believe free will cannot be there. But remember that your free will is nothing if you don't exist. Okay, think about who created you. That even you don't have. You are not self-created. Only God is self-created. Swabhang. So we cannot create ourselves. How can we claim that we have the free will? So there is some source outside, which yes, at the other end of the spectrum, yes, you feel like doing that, everything you are doing it, but if the source is taken away, you don't have free will. So we have to keep that in mind.
Okay, thank you, Ji, very much. Very interesting point that you've raised. I'm not going to get into a discussion, but I'm making a note of it. You're positing here that there is a difference between, that there is a distance and a difference between us and as if creation is as an event where we are different. I would like to suggest that we really are not very different. We are perhaps focal points for this.
Very good.
Okay, thank you. With that said, Arvinder, thank you for organizing this. And for Guru Fateh Pravan Waheguru Ji Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.